Welcome to Diagnosing Health Care, a podcast featuring thought-provoking conversations about the latest legal, policy, and regulatory issues in healthcare. While these issues may seem like hurdles, we'll also look at the business opportunities and solutions that exist. Diagnosing Healthcare is brought to you by the healthcare lawyers at Epstein Becker Green, a leading law firm that has more than 40 years' experience serving clients in the healthcare industry nationwide.
Although the COVID-19 pandemic exposed cybersecurity vulnerabilities across sectors, it has particularly challenged the resilience of information systems for healthcare and life sciences companies. Because ransomware attacks have the potential to cripple access to important data, expose patient health records, and to shut down machinery and life-saving equipment, it's no surprise that healthcare executives continue to lose sleep thinking about potential ransomware or other similar malicious attacks. Today on Diagnosing Healthcare, we discuss the impact of ransomware attacks on the healthcare and life sciences industries and considerations for companies to strengthen their cybersecurity posture. Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Jessika Tuazon. I'm an attorney in Epstein Becker Green's healthcare and life sciences practice based out of our Los Angeles office. Healthcare and life sciences companies are among the most attractive targets for cyber criminals. Cyber attacks on sensitive data, including patient and research data, and attacks in essential supply chains and industries are increasing drastically. Group IB's recent report, Ransomware Uncovered 2020 to 2021, indicated ransomware was up 150% in the past year, with the average extortion amount doubling. A Comparatech report found that the U.S. healthcare industry lost $20.8 billion in 2020 due to downtime caused by ransomware attacks. Based on trends in recent attacks, it is clear that executives and board members need to take seriously the evolving threat of ransomware and to be prepared to answer the tough questions about their organization's vulnerabilities and the steps that need to be taken when confronted with a ransomware attack. On today's show, we're going to talk about what is driving the recent increase in ransomware attacks and dive deeper into the questions raised by the cryptocurrency ransom payments organizations are being asked to make. If you like what you hear today, please subscribe to the show. Diagnosing Healthcare is available wherever you get your podcasts. Joining our discussion today are Andrew Morrison and Alaap Shah. Andrew Morrison is a Cyber Risk Services Strategy, Defense, and Response Solution Leader for Deloitte Risk Financial Advisory. His focus is on the development and delivery of cross-industry services, helping clients improve their preparedness for cyber attacks and accelerating enterprise business recovery in the wake of cyber incidents. Welcome, Andrew, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Jessica. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. Also joining our discussion is Alaap Shah. Alaap is a member of the firm at Epstein Becker Green. He previously served as senior counsel and chief privacy and security officer at an oncology membership society. He now focuses on defense and counseling of healthcare entities on legal and regulatory compliance issues around privacy, cybersecurity, and data asset management.
Hi, Jessica. Thanks for having me. Really excited to have this discussion.
I am as well. So Andrew and Alaap. To kick off our discussion, I wanted to take a few moments to provide some background information about ransomware for any of our listeners who may not be familiar with this subject. Ransomware is a type of malicious software or malware that prevents you from accessing your computer files, systems, or networks and demands that you pay a ransom for their return. Certain recent developments in the healthcare and life sciences industries have made them increasingly more vulnerable to ransomware attacks, such as the digitization of patient data, the rise in the use of telemedicine, and the increased use of new applications that enable access to protected health information. On top of these changes, the COVID-19 pandemic also accelerated industry's use of and reliance on cloud services and medical devices that require connection to the internet or core clinical system. Cyber criminals are able to infiltrate company servers by taking advantage of network and connectivity vulnerabilities to encrypt data and prevent companies from accessing their critical records. Recently, rather than directly attack companies' networks, we've also seen cyber criminals exploit vulnerabilities in third-party software that are critical for running the company's operations. For healthcare and life sciences companies, ransomware attacks have the potential to cut off access to critical data, expose patient health records, and shut down life-saving equipment and machinery. The critical question that companies must ask themselves is, should we pay the ransom? Ultimately, paying a ransom is a business decision that companies will need to be comfortable making. Which leads me to my first question. Alaap and Andrew, what should executives be thinking about when faced with this decision?
Sure. I'm happy to jump in, Jessica. There are several factors that go into making a decision about making a payment. What are the risks to the organization currently? Is there operational disruption that could cause financial stress? Is the impact going to create safety concerns to patients, for example, in the healthcare setting? Are there reputational issues at stake here with regard to disclosures of private patient information? You also have to ask, do you have a cybercrime policy that covers ransom payment? Oftentimes, these ransom requests are very large in amounts. And so you want to make sure that you have some pot of money to look to be able to make that payment without creating financial stress in your organization. And you also have to ask, will the policy have enough coverage to deal with other ancillary costs related to this event, such as business continuity expenses, regulatory reporting and notification, or other defense costs? Then you also have to ask, does your company have a business continuity and backup strategy that you can rely on to restore operations in the event of a ransomware? And to make things worse, the ransomware encrypting your network is not the only thing that hackers are using to gain leverage in these scenarios. They're also exfiltrating data from your network. So you have to ask the question, has data been exfiltrated and what risks are associated with that in terms of making a payment? I think there's also a separate and perhaps even more important question to ask in terms of who actually has authority to make a decision in an organization about making a ransom payment. And there's a number of considerations that go into it. Have the roles and authority been determined in advance as between the board or executive leadership? Are there response protocols in place about how to engage the right stakeholders to investigate and start making these decisions? How is information going to get communicated among the stakeholders? And is there an approval process by which either the board or executive leadership can make a decision about these kinds of things? There are clearly fiduciary obligations as between the board and executive leadership that will drive those kinds of authorities and governance about how to make those decisions. These things are better thought out in advance. So when you're actually faced with the ransomware event, you're in a position to actually do this quickly and soundly.
Yeah, I'll agree with everything Alaap said there. And those are all excellent suggestions and considerations for what to do when faced with the question of, should I pay a ransom? I think there's probably a more fundamental question that the first thing you should consider is, will paying the ransom have the desired effect? And that is, will you get your data back or the ability to decrypt your data? I think a lot of executives spend a lot of time focusing on the mechanics of the ransom payment, the legality of the ransom payment, how it will be impacted, as Alaap mentioned, who can make the decision. Before all of that, it's important to assess the attack and whether the attacker will actually have the ability to give you the decryption key you need to get the data back. And it's not always the case that that's true. One of the nuances with cyber attacks is that they're reusable methods and they're not always consumed or used by threat actors that are as sophisticated as some groups. So you may run into a situation where a very sophisticated tool that has been used to attack your environment is being deployed by a very unsophisticated hacker who may or may not have the ability to decrypt. They may only have the ability to encrypt your data and demand a payment. So I think there's an assessment that goes with the attack to try to understand not just the tools being used, but if you can ascertain the attacker, and any research or intelligence you have on that entity will help you form that opinion. There are known hacker collectives out there and a lot of research on many of them. And some of them are known for giving you your data back, largely because it incentivizes others to pay the ransom if they attack in the future. If the hacker becomes known as a group that does not give you your data back, then they quickly will not receive payment going forward. So there's a little bit of an honor among thieves mentality here, that if you can figure out who the attacker is and some intelligence on their propensity to pay, you're in a better spot for making that first decision of, will it have the effect I desire to get my data back?
Thank you, Alaap and Andrew. Those are all very helpful tips and considerations for companies and executives to be thinking about. While we're on the topic of paying ransom, I think we would be remiss if we didn't talk just a little bit about cryptocurrency and the regulatory environment around it. Cyber criminals typically request ransoms to be paid in cryptocurrency because it's difficult to track and to follow across digital wallets and national borders. However, as many of our listeners know, paying hackers affiliated with sanctioned entities could result in penalties from the Treasury Department. I know there's been quite a bit of news about this recently, with certain news reports suggesting that the Biden administration is examining cryptocurrency's role in cyber events that have disrupted important industries, including healthcare. And although this administration hasn't publicly released details on its approach, there are early communications suggesting that the US is looking to work with international partners to identify consistent policies for when to pay ransoms, how to trace them, and some of these other questions that I'm sure are circling around a lot of companies' minds whenever they're faced with potential ransomware threats. So maybe to start off, Alaap, can you tell us a little bit more about the current regulatory and enforcement landscape around cryptocurrency payments?
Sure, happy to. As many of you listeners have probably seen in front page headlines, ransomware is top of mind for everyone. This is including regulatory enforcement bodies in the US and abroad. In the US specifically, the Biden administration has made ransomware a top priority. The Biden administration announced a new cross-agency measure to address these recent attacks that have been hitting our critical infrastructure. The details are a little fuzzy at this point, but the signal the administration is sending is unequivocal. Resources are going to be brought to bear on this ransomware problem. And this development more recently comes on the heels of an April announcement that the Department of Justice had made that ransomware is a top enforcement priority for that organization. And they launched a task force bringing together a variety of experts in this area, enforcement officials, the intelligence community, and other industry experts to develop a plan of action and to start understanding how to better engage in threat intelligence sharing. And we've already seen some success through that effort in the context of one of the larger ransomware and more visible ransomware events that occurred. The DOJ actually was able to successfully seize some of the funds that were paid as part of the ransom in that event. The interesting thing about cryptocurrency is that it's built on an immutable blockchain ledger, which is public. Everyone can see where the money goes through transactions. It's almost like marking paper currency to track it. There's a breadcrumb trail that people can follow. And that's what the DOJ did in this context. They were able to track where these payments were being made from Bitcoin wallet to Bitcoin wallet or whatever digital crypto wallet it was going to. And then they used some, other black box techniques, which I don't think they're going to share with us, and I don't encourage them to do so, but they were able to recoup a large chunk of the money that was paid in that context. So we're seeing success. We'll see how sustainable that success is over the long term. There are other regulatory bodies that are also engaging in this effort. The State Department has launched a financial reward program for information on foreign state-sponsored hacking efforts targeting U.S. critical infrastructure. So there's a carrot there for whistleblowers to come forward and share information. The Treasury Department, as you mentioned, has also issued guidance via OFAC and FinCEN about thwarting ransom payments to terrorists. The FBI has always been involved in ransomware response efforts, but has reinvigorated those efforts through interagency collaboration with the DOJ and the Treasury Department and others. And it continues to support countless victims of ransomware to date. And then finally, we still have tons of technical guidance around cybersecurity best practices that come out of the Department of Health and Human Services or the National Institutes of Standards and Technology, as well as the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA. There's no lack of guidance coming out, and there's definitely no lack of engagement. Now, the question really will be, how do they galvanize all these efforts in a unified way, both here in the United States and abroad?
Thanks a lot. Andrew, did you have anything else you'd like to add or any suggestions about legal or regulatory guardrails that companies should be keeping in mind before they proceed with paying a ransom?
Yeah, Alaap covered a number of the regulatory concerns and some of the guidance that has been issued by the FinCEN and Treasury regarding OFAC. I think it's a tricky situation because OFAC designates, not just embargoed countries and regions, but also individuals, and increasingly has named most of the major attacks, cyber attacks over the last 5 years. They've attributed back to individuals that OFAC has designated on their list. So you do have a potential to run afoul of making a payment to a designated entity or individual. I think what was interesting in the guidance that was released was some of the mitigating factors they issued to companies, serving both as a warning against the payment, but also steps to take to mitigate any infractions. And, self-disclosed timely notification of the incident was one of the key findings, that your cooperation with law enforcement, your diligence in investigating the attack, and your disclosure in a timely manner were mitigating factors towards any violations. I am not familiar with prosecutions in this space yet, but it's clearly an area where there's a lot of focus and attention on who you might be paying, who you might be sponsoring. And OFAC's just one of the issues. You've got AML laws as well that should be taken into consideration when making ransom payments. There's Patriot Act concerns for known terrorist organizations, designated terrorist organizations. So there's a number of concerns that go into the legality of making the ransom payment. As you mentioned at the outset, that all has to be a comprehensive part of what is ultimately a business decision as to whether the ransom is necessary to be paid based on the impact it's having on the organization. I think a number of organizations have shifted their thinking from we'll never pay ransom to we'd have to have a plan and a procedure and a policy in place for under what circumstances we would pay ransom. And it's a different mindset. Outside the legal implications, you also have reputational concerns with becoming known as someone who paid ransom. Are you opening yourself up to future issues from the disclosure to the public, which a number of organizations ultimately end up publicly disclosing that the ransom has been paid through one means or another, intentionally or not? Is there an outcome of that where either brand and reputation risk, shareholder concerns about the amount that was paid, why it was paid, and then finally, are you opening yourself up to being known as someone who pays ransom for future attacks? And that's a real concern in the cyberspace, in that the attackers now know that you've paid in the past, you have likely an insurance policy that covered it, and you become a bright, shiny object for future attackers to target ransom payments, knowing that there's a potential for a similar outcome.
I'll just add one more point. I think those are great considerations Andrew brought up. The other point is, if you become a company that's known to pay ransom, you also put yourself in a more difficult position from a cyber insurance coverage perspective as well, because you'll have a claims history that suggests that you're more likely to pay ransom. And depending on the volume of the payment, it may be more difficult to obtain the coverage that you're looking for. So there's also that business driver in the background.
Thanks, Andrew and Alaap. I think you both actually touched on what was going to be my next question. As we've all seen, the increase in ransomware payouts, or really just the focus on ransomware incidences, have really put a spotlight on the importance of cybersecurity insurance coverage. Over the past several years, we've seen insurance carriers scrutinizing cybersecurity controls and tightening their underwriting guidelines. Other than what you've already mentioned, are there any other developments you've been seeing in the cyber insurance space? Are there things that companies should be doing to prepare and or qualify for these policies? What are sort of things that executives should be thinking about, or opportunities for them to maybe start getting ahead of this in advance of any sort of incidents happening to their companies?
I think the most significant change in the recent 12 to 18 months is the increased premiums for cyber insurance and the increased restrictions on the policies. I think for years, cyber insurance has been a very profitable business for the insurers. Since its inception, they've made much more on premiums than having to pay out on claims. This new, and I say new, but the evolving nature of ransomware has shifted the insurers' thinking and need to be more diligent in the underwriting, and their losses are exceeding their premiums. And it's for a couple of reasons. When cyber insurance was created, the average loss, financial loss, was largely limited to credit monitoring for individuals, investigation costs, and occasionally if it was lost funds or transfer of assets. But generally, it was a lower cost than what we're seeing now with ransomware. The average, even when ransomware became popular, 2015-ish, the average ransom was very low. It was meant to be a nuisance payment that was something an individual or a company would pay in lieu of hiring external consultants to do major investigation, to do major remediation work. It was meant to be something that was easy to go away and make a small payment. That's really changed almost in a self-fulfilling prophecy kind of way. Because cyber insurance exists, the payment amount is increasing dramatically. We see ransom payments now in the $40 million range, the $50 million ask. And that's orders of magnitude larger than they were 5 years ago, when it was tens of thousands of dollars, averaging about $200,000 in 2017-ish. When you're talking 40 and 50 million for a single loss event, it forces the insurers to recalculate the model. Cyber insurance is not an insurance agency or insurer's best friend, because There isn't a ton of historical data. It doesn't operate in a mathematically predictable kind of way. The evolution of the attacks is very fast, and the nature of the attacks and the type of attack and the motive of the attacker shifts dramatically. So it's very hard to stay on top of the underwriting. So, I'd say the most dramatic shift I've seen is the increased scrutiny from the insurer on the underwriting process, demanding more evidence from the insured as to their cyber posture, the environment, the tools they use, the risks they're accepting, and the systems they're using to prevent attacks, and the corresponding increase in premium, as well as heightened restrictions and exclusions in the policies around ransomware, specifically with caps on the amount they'll pay, with removing it entirely. So much so that a number of my clients are, reevaluating whether cyber insurance makes financial sense at all, given the dramatic increase in cost.
Yeah, those are great points, Andrew. I echo everything you've said, and that's similar to what I've learned about the shift in the cyber insurance market as well. The interesting thing is that cyber insurance companies, they have now realized what I think Andrew and I have probably said to our clients forever, which is there is no thing as 100% secure, and it's only a matter of time until you become a victim of a hacking event like ransomware. That inevitability is really taking hold of this industry in a way where the insurance companies are losing their shirts, quite frankly. This is going to have long-lasting impacts, as Andrew pointed out. If you are looking to re-up your insurance, to increase your coverage, or to otherwise get reinsurance, you're going to have to be prepared to have those conversations. And as Andrew pointed out, you need to go in with a clear communication about how strong your security posture is, because the insurance companies are likely going to weed out the bad apples and look to cherry pick in the market moving forward, at least for some time, until they understand how to better underwrite these policies and create a risk pool.
Another item on the insurance point that helps is if you, the company, understand your value at risk from a cyber event. Most organizations haven't quantified their cyber risk in dollar terms very well. They don't understand what the true cost of an incident would be. They understand some of the obvious, what we call above the surface costs of an incident around direct ransom payment, around investigative costs, around remediation costs, but the actual cost of an incident is much higher than most estimates. And it's very specific to your organization. So doing financial modeling and risk modeling in your organization around what would our true value at risk be in the event of X type of cyber attack, and using that in negotiation with your insurer to have a more custom policy rather than the generic off-the-shelf policies that most are offering, that's tailored to your risk profile, can help both the client understand the risk and then negotiate a rate for insuring it.
Thanks, Andrew and Alaap. Those are all very helpful tips for all of our listeners to be thinking about. As we've discussed, companies must weigh a number of competing factors and need to make a number of different decisions when thinking through the threat of ransomware attacks. There is no doubt that these issues and decisions are keeping executives and general counsel up at night. So for my last question for each of you, if you could give one piece of advice to any executive or general counsel or really anybody who's in charge of making these types of decisions at any company, what advice would you give them?
Gain and share awareness of this issue. As much as you can gain, there's plenty of resources out there. Go seek those out, learn and share information internally. Get buy-in from your board and other leadership about how to adequately resource and oversee a cybersecurity program to reduce risk around ransomware. And then open the lines of communication across your organization, making sure you're talking to your operations folks, your legal folks, your compliance folks, IT, public relations. Form a response team, test it periodically to make sure everyone understands their roles and responsibilities, and ultimately get ready for the rainy day because it's coming. So just be prepared and you'll get through it. But you need to know that everyone is working in concert with one another.
And I think for the executive, I'd be curious to find an executive or general counsel who isn't being kept up at night in regards to these questions. This is it's omnipresent. It's a very popular risk right now and a real threat to companies, both financially and existentially. We have companies that can be put out of business, especially in the healthcare arena. downtime is a life safety issue. So, it's a real significant concern for organizations. I think we're focusing a lot on the ransomware question in this podcast, but ransomware is just the method or the vector of the attack. Cyber attacks overall are increasing in severity, scale, and scope, and the mode of the attacker is shifting commensurate to their opportunistic gain. I think the advice I would give to executives is to be very cognizant of the role the business decisions and environment that you're operating in play in exposing you to cyber attacks. As cyber has elevated to an enterprise risk, it is because the move to digitize our business, to push computing as close to the edge as possible, to be closer to patients and customers and clients through sharing of information and interaction, all of these technological advances that allow organizations to be more operationally efficient and to be more agile and to share more with their constituents are the pathways that are opening up doors for cyber attacks. And I think there's a healthy analysis of the business environment and what threats that may yield from a cyber perspective. For instance, most cyber attacks take advantage of some level of disruption. COVID has been an obvious disruption for the last 18 months. The increase in cyber attacks during COVID is due to a number of reasons, but business models shifted very quickly to a work from home environment, which opened up a series of new vulnerabilities in organizations to allow attackers in. Back to the cyber insurance conversation, when you had known employees at a known location, securing that location was easier than having a very distributed workforce that is now connecting from non-owned devices and non-corporate networks. So that disruption is an avenue for the attacker. Similarly, most of the major incidents occur in the wake of some organizational initiative or disruption. There was a major attack recently where it occurred 3 days after a CEO transition. These business events that cause a lot of focus for your entity and for your organization also are the focus of cyber criminals who are doing a lot of reconnaissance on your business and understand your business probably as well as you do as to what initiatives you're undertaking. Do you have a pending IPO? Do you have a merger? Are you implementing new ERP software? These things that are all discoverable by a well-trained and motivated attacker open up a lot of avenues for attack. And if you have that mentality and that culture of safety and security with regards to cyber as you're doing business planning, it helps immensely to be vigilant against the types of attacks that might occur.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Andrew and Alaap, for joining us on Diagnosing Healthcare today. It was such a pleasure discussing cybersecurity and ransomware with you, and you've given our listeners such great insight and a number of tips to take back to their companies.
Thanks, Jessica. It was a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Jessica, for hosting, and Alaap, it was a pleasure presenting with you.
Thanks, Andrew. You too.
I would also like to thank the audience for listening to our podcast. If you like what you hear today, please subscribe to the show. Diagnosing Healthcare is available wherever you get your podcasts.
Thank you for listening to Diagnosing Healthcare. For show notes on today's episode, additional episodes, and more insights on trending issues in healthcare, please visit diagnosinghealthcare.com and be sure to subscribe on your preferred platform. The Employment Law This Week and Diagnosing Healthcare podcasts are presented by Epstein Becker Green, PC. All rights are reserved. This audio recording includes information about legal issues and legal developments. Such materials are for informational purposes only and may not reflect the most current legal developments. These informational materials are not intended and should not be taken as legal advice on any particular set of facts or circumstances, and these materials are not a substitute for the advice of competent counsel. The content reflects the personal views and opinions of the participants. No attorney-client relationship has been created by this audio recording. This audio recording may be considered attorney advertising in some jurisdictions under the applicable law and ethical rules. The determination of the need for legal services and the choice of a lawyer are extremely important decisions and should not be based solely upon advertisements or self-proclaimed expertise. No representation is made that the quality of the legal services to be performed is greater than the quality of legal services performed by other lawyers.